Buenas noches, buenas tardes, buenos días a todos, a los que se conectan ya a Suglatam, esta sesión número 16. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a todos, a todas. Una vez más, qué bueno tenerles. Ahora sí estamos activos, más activos que nunca. Y bueno, tenemos un invitado de maravilla, esta vez también, como siempre, ¿no? Por supuesto. Muy bien, entonces, lo que tenemos que hacer es switch our language, switch our brain language to English right now. And we're gonna give a warm welcome to our guest. He has had 11 years of experience with Sitecore. He's 5+ times Sitecore MVP. He has been ambassador and strategy MVP. He has attended various symposiums in Orlando, in Chicago. He was a speaker in Minneapolis SoCon, and he also has co-hosts and co-organized the Sitecore Lunch with our earliest guest, Corey Smith. He quilts for hobby, and let's give a round of applause and welcome to Jim Petillo.
Thank you.
Hello, Jim. How are you?
Good. How are you doing? Happy to be here today.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We're very happy and we're very glad to have you here in our session number 16. We can see a quilt in your background.
Yeah, I put that. That's the most recent one I put together.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. Well, without further to say, you will be giving us a very, very interesting topic today. We can't wait to see it and to learn from you. So the stage is all yours.
All right. So we're going to get started. Welcome to Content Migration Tips for Marketers. So in this session, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to make your migration project buttery smooth throughout the entire process. To start, my name is Jim Petillo. I'm a six-time MVP, six-time Sitecore MVP in both the ambassador and strategy categories. I've got about 11 years, 10 plus years of Sitecore authoring experience, and I've spent 20 years in the digital and content and digital marketing space. I'm going to drop in some quick plugs, starting with Sitecore Lunch, and I co-host Sitecore Lunch with Corey Smith. It's a weekly social meetup group where we have conversations about Sitecore and conversations not about Sitecore. It's pretty well attended by members of the Sitecore community, and occasionally Sitecore employees will show up so you can hit them with questions. To join us, you have to join the Sitecore Slack at sitecore.chat. And then if you watch the general channel on Fridays at 12:15 Eastern Time, Corey usually will post the Zoom URL and a password. Sitecore Lunch also happens in Europe and in other locations, and you can find more information about that at my next slide, which is the Sitecore subreddit. So the sub features community blog posts, a calendar of different Sitecore events that are out there, and user groups, and general news about and around the Sitecore community. So if you have a blog and you want it to get added to the feed that I post on there, if you go to the sub and send a message to the mods, or you can reach out to me in Slack with your RSS feed, I'll add it and I'll start to promote your posts. I'll automatically post any new ones that come up. So let's get started on the agenda. Today, we're going to explore both Sitecore and content migration tips across three sections that are going to cover the planning, the doing, and then what comes next. So we're going to start, of course, with the planning. Like everything else, your content migration should have SMART goals and objectives to determine success. Some of your performance goals can include improved page load speeds or a better user experience. Content goals can include improving your content quality and discoverability, and making for better SEO with metadata and tagging. So one important thing to know too is you have to collect your before benchmarks so you have something to measure against post-migration. I have never had clients say, I wish we had less time to migrate. So give yourself an adequate runway because things can go sideways, but you'll always find something to fill in extra time if that happens. Concrete dates can change, so you should avoid tying your new launch dates to specific events. And if you're moving platforms, take when you need to be off your current platform into account so that you can avoid paying licensing fees for a system that you're not going to be using. So there are four factors that are going to affect migration effort. This chart on the right by David Hobbs illustrates how complex your migration is going to be. So the distance, it's in the y-axis, that's described as changes to the platform from none to new, and it's plotted against depth on the x-axis, and that's described as changes to the user's experience from none to a full site revamp. The further you move out on each axis, the difficulty of doing your migration increases. And not in that chart is weight. Weight refers to the volume of the content that's being migrated. So less content to move takes less time and effort to move content over. And you should also consider phases. If the migration complexity and the timeline don't allow you to do it all in one go. So some CMS platforms do not make it easy to leave. You should explore and discuss your options to get your content and your assets out of your current CMS and into Sitecore. The Sitecore data exchange framework supports many formats, so you do have some options, but it can be tricky to use. There are also some third-party tools and platforms that can help you, like Gather Content. And if you're migrating from Sitecore to Sitecore, your best bet is to use packages. For general help on tips and moving into the cloud, you can consult Sitecore's migration advisor at migration.sitecore.com. Fill out a couple of questions and they'll give you some good tips and advice on what to do next. So while we're talking about getting content out, let's talk about automated versus manual migration. So automation is not a silver bullet, and it's not easier than manual migration. There's no simple migration script that's going to move content into multiple components and assemble the pages into their proper layout for you. That's what your authoring team is going to do. So any automated migration will always need to be followed up by some manual effort to verify and correct any of the issues with the content being brought over. With automated migration, the development of automation scripts requires developer effort and a lot of trial and error to ensure everything is mapped and moved over as requested. Automation can work best when the content being processed is structured, consistent, and easily targeted by a migration script. You'll have better odds automating highly structured content over hand-coded HTML. With automation, content transformations like converting links to point to new items might not be possible. And so that's going to be left up to your authors to fix. And any new content being developed outside of your CMS and not in the range of the scripts that you're using is going to need to be moved manually. Automation won't ever be moving the whole entire site at once. It works better when it's divided into smaller pieces that the authors can then use to assemble your pages. And again, it works best for items that are in simple, consistent formats like press releases or databases of structured items like locations or people. And content can also be scraped and added into a single RTE field that authors will need to reformat into a better layout, moving it into other components or just changing the layout of the text. Turning to the other side of it, manual migration can start right away once the needed templates and components are in place with no extra development time needed. If all of the content and assets are also available and ready to move, manual effort can be done in one pass with no multiple iterations needed. And the content can be reviewed and edited in real time with built-in QA and ROT analysis by your authoring team. So one last note here, effort for automation should be gauged against other development efforts needed on the project, like for templates and components. Try and suss out how much efficiency you're going to gain with automation over manual migration and then decide. Sites of less than 1,000 pages may not be good candidates for automated migration and might go better if you do them manually with just a larger authoring team or more resources. Start out with a point-in-time content inventory done with an SEO crawler like Screaming Frog. There are additional crawlers that are available out there. There's one called Sitebold. There's URL Profiler. And then there's another one. It's an old but free PC-based application called ZNews Link Sleuth. It's a little bit finicky to use and it can be a little bit tricky. There's another tool called Content Chimera by David Hobbs, and that'll take your inventory and give you a deeper analysis and graphical representations of your site content and your migration plan and the progress as you move through it. And don't forget to inventory pages that might get missed because they're intentionally hidden, like your campaign pages, or they're behind a login that the crawler just can't get through. Once there, categorize the like pages by type or by template so you can edit the sheet fields for properties in bulk. And then start moving into your audit with columns for your decision points. Only include the data you feel is going to help you make decisions, like the number of page views from analytics to determine if that page is popular or not, or the last updated or published date to determine how fresh and relevant that piece of content or page really is. And then continue into your audit by identifying pages with complex layouts, forms, and third-party integrations that might take longer to author or require more dev effort to build. If you set up reasonable criteria and rules, you can define how to handle your ROT content, and that's redundant, outdated, and trivial. For example, the last 3 years of press releases will get moved as is, and then we just get rid of the rest and don't migrate them because we don't need them. Or all of the top level pages are going to have new copy and a brand new header image, and then the rest of the content will follow as it goes along. Jot down your recommended editorial treatments with a column for migration action, tagging pages as new, edit or consolidate, keep as is, or remove. And then add a column for your effort with none, low, medium, and high to document the migration effort as you move into your migration plan in later steps. So we've figured out what we have and what we want to do with it. And now we need to figure out how to arrange it. Spreadsheet formats can make visualization difficult. So make a visual representation of your sitemap using Figma, Miro, or any other type of graphical flowcharting software. Depending on your site size, a large sitemap in Figma might be unwieldy. So consider doing smaller detailed maps by section that can roll up into the larger map. You can use colors, patterns, and icons to represent different aspects of your site, like different content types and templates. Use stacks to represent large numbers of similar pages instead of listing them out individually to keep things like article, event, and blog post areas simple. And if possible, illustrate the links and relationships to other sections of your site through your shared content. As you go through, track your current URLs and their future URLs inside of your inventory, because you're going to be using these for your redirect plan. So as you map out your URLs, here are some tips on naming conventions. So every Sitecore URL should lead to a page that has content. In some cases, you want the item to exist solely to make a good URL for SEO purposes without a page, like a blog. So if the need is for a descriptive URL for SEO purposes, this item should be a folder with a redirect. This way, a user going to that directly gets redirected to somewhere rather than getting an error. If you're just pointing at the if just pointing at the very first item doesn't work, discuss where that URL should go to, or if a landing page with a dynamic listing or some other content is going to need to be spun up to support that. For naming conventions, items that are going to use numbers should have leading zeros to help with sorting. This ensures that 10 and 11 come after 2 and not before it. The same applies to dates. If you go by year, then month, then date, November will come after October and not before. So as you go into your migration plan, start gauging the effort needed to satisfy the rules that you came up with during your audit. How long is it going to take for you to write and produce assets for those new top level pages? And how many new top level pages do you have? Take into account all of the new content that you're going to have to be creating and the design and editing time for content that's being merged and consolidated. If it doesn't pencil out with the time or the resources that you have available, and you can't add resources or extend a deadline, iterate on the rules until you can get something to work. And don't forget, you can always move your less critical content in later phases or move more content over as is instead of creating brand new content from scratch in order to lower that effort and give you just a little bit more time. So one final note on effort, every site has 1 or 2 Franken pages, and these are custom-built pages that stick out from their surrounding pages and templates by the virtue of being a pet project or something that had to be thrown together running up against strict requirements, or even the implementation of third-party apps using raw HTML to add functionality instead of just using an existing component. The resulting page is usually this bolted together combination of 2 or more page templates or an iframe or some type of unnaturally occurring collection of components from multiple placeholders that's used to display content from different sources. These pages should definitely be considered complex if you're not redoing them as a new component or as a template. They also would make excellent candidates for design exercises. So next, we're going to organize your content into batches and prioritize. Some content on the site needs to go first by the nature of being needed or being used by other pages or components, like a service or a specialty that's only available at select locations or from select people, that fills in a required field that you can't publish an item without. While it seems counterintuitive to migrate the most technically difficult or complex content first, doing so gives you the most time to resolve any issues that are going to come up out of it. This can include content that's going to need extra review, like the Franken pages. Easier, low effort content can be done at any time, and it can be used to fill in the gaps throughout the migration process. Content should also be prioritized against templates and components needed to build them. So this ensures that your complete pages get built and entered in one pass or as few passes as possible. Volatile content is content that's going to change frequently throughout the course of your migration. Stakeholders hate the term content freeze. Authoring teams hate doing dual development and rework across 2 different systems. And the effort involved in touching pages multiple times to keep it current when nobody is even looking at it in the new system is better spent elsewhere. You should try and move this content last, or build it once for review and update it during the later content freeze. Ask your stakeholders to help you track anything new that gets added after your point in time inventory is run, because you're going to need to reconcile it at the end. And now we're going to start migrating. So first and foremost, I like to explain to all authors that the environment you're working in is a work in progress and does not reflect the final product that you're working in. If you explain that to authors, they'll understand that something they did might not have caused the entire site to crash, and then they won't get discouraged. Consider suspending the use of workflow and making everyone a super user or an admin in order to facilitate entering in content quickly. You can begin with page stubs for any of the content you're going to manually migrate. This will allow you to update links um, as you come across them to point to their new locations. And if you start small, assign a few pages at the start of each batch to let everybody that's authoring kick the tires and get them all on the same page for any specific needs for a given template or a component. These small runs can help validate the effort estimates for content entry and QA that you put into your plan, and they'll give you a chance to pivot if an issue comes up. Optimizing your media. So large images can cause a drag on page load times. So as you start adding your assets, optimize them before adding them into the media library. Dianoga is a great add-on for Sitecore to further optimize your images. It's not a replacement for best practices, it's an enhancement. It'll also convert your images to lighter web-friendly formats like WebP and SVG. And if you're putting your assets into Content Hub instead of the media library, consider making component-specific renditions to optimize your page heroes or your content cards. And trigger them only when necessary with scripts, not automatically. And it'll help keep down the clutter in your Content Hub instance. Adding assets to the media library can take some practice, and new authors can make some easily fixable mistakes. If you monitor the media library throughout the migration process and it'll help you get your assets into the right places. So sometimes items wind up in the root of the media library or the wrong folder if the location isn't set. This headshot image is clearly out of place in this header folder and should be moved where someone else can expect to find it to fix it, like the personas folder maybe. Sometimes assets will wind up nested under other images, which will make for really odd URLs. You'll notice that these two extra images don't show up in the right-hand panel, and they won't otherwise be discovered because the parent image is acting like a folder. If you move these out from underneath the parent image, that'll fix it. And then sometimes authors will upload multiple images into a folder to give stakeholders multiple options to choose from. Once the selection is made, you should delete out any unused images. Look for items with no usages shown, and then you can safely delete those. And then sometimes authors will add duplicate images just by accident. Reconcile this by getting rid of the unused or the least used image, and then repoint the item to the remaining image using the prompts that come up when you delete it. Moving on to naming and organizing. Naming and organizing your components in their data folders can make for better maintenance for authors and your site maintainers. This is also important with reusable global items. And then some simple visual cues are going to be able to help you here. So if you don't do anything with your components, they're going to take on their names by default with the addition of the same component being numbered, but without the leading zeros. As you can see, this would not be very helpful, and you can't really tell one call out or text component from another. It's a bigger problem in the global folder of reusable content that only contains the same component. Just adding descriptive names to your duplicated components are going to help authors find the component they need to edit just a little bit faster. And if you take it a step further and order the components in the folder in the same order that they appear on the page, you're giving future authors and maintainers those additional visual cues that will help them find the component they need to manage much quicker. Lorem ipsum content. You should avoid lorem ipsum and placeholder images. Lorem ipsum's designed to be visually deceptive. So somebody doing a quick UA pass on your site might not realize that the real content is really not there. Fancy ipsum generators like bacon ipsum and placeholder generators like place kitten are very cute for your comps, but it's not so cute when it accidentally gets published, gets indexed, and site visitors look at it and then start to wonder, like, what are they doing? And they lose trust in your site. As your migration progresses, you're going to come across a few square pegs. Small issues can be noted in your sheet or in the ticketing system. Larger blocking issues should be addressed as soon as possible to keep the migration plan on track. Some examples to look out for include content for new required fields you didn't have before, like new subtitles, or content cards that must have an image or a link in order to be published. You can also find content that's not in the right format, like trying to add rich text or HTML into a simple text field that doesn't support text formatting. There's also new content taxonomy or tagging that's needed for that one section's pages to be visible in a dynamic view. And finally, images that are the wrong size or format, like having a JPEG and needing an SVG or vice versa. New fields being introduced during the migration of existing content are commonly overlooked. So a way to shave down the corners on square pegs is with guides. If you construct content guides for new items and checklists to verify against existing items, it'll help ensure that all the required fields and parts for your components get filled out. It's also your opportunity to add in missing metadata for pages or alt tags for images. A big part of helping authors make good decisions are insert options and assigning data source folders to fields. So when it comes to insert options for pages and components, too many options can be just as bad as too few. Component selection panels with 2 rows of tabs can be a nightmare to navigate through, and it'll really slow down authoring. Data source folders for component fields are also key to ensuring that media and content items come from and are added into the right folders on your site. Branch templates can also help streamline authoring and allow you to design a page once, but reuse it many times. This helps to ensure that the authors are consistent with building out pages, and it really cuts down on the design time. If you keep your branch templates simple, using a base layout and components needed to provide a backbone for the page, authors can flesh out these pages with custom components or features where they're needed. And it's much quicker than building an entire page from zero. QA and UAT. Oh, QA should happen a lot. Authors should be performing their own content QA as they go, noting any issues or missing and broken items in your spreadsheet. You should be QAing your forms and your videos too. Perform your official content QA at the completion of each content batch and only on the items that are marked as ready for QA. Proceed with UAT carefully. Let the reviewers know that this is their chance to see how their page will look at launch and not an opportunity to rework the entire page. Have them stick to the content that's blessed by the content guides or listed in the sheet. Their change of opinion is not a bug. You need to hold firm and save the new ideas for the post-launch phases of the project. Take notes as you and your authoring team go through the migration and the page building process. You can discuss them during office hours and working sessions and maintain forward momentum throughout your migration. Use these notes to build out your documentation and your tip sheets. Complex templates, tricky components, and rough processes that can't be fixed in that instant can be prioritized against other items in the post-migration backlog. And then training is another item that often gets neglected. Find a quiet time with no distractions and make recordings for each template using a solo Teams meeting of one. These recordings can be used to supplement live demos or documentation. Create example pages for authors to have as a reference to keep consistency in how pages or components are being added and assembled. And then schedule working sessions or office hours because they're going to promote people learning and solving problems working on your site together. Get your documentation going and start it in Confluence or any of the other systems like Zero Height that are available. Have sections built out for templates, components, and processes. Revisit these as necessary if the components or the templates change during and after your migration. And doing your screenshots for these for documentation last ensures that your docs have the most up-to-date images inside of them. So as you approach the end of your migration, you're going to be doing some content catch-up. Verify your running list of content added to your current site is accurate with a quick content inventory, and surface any new pages added that were not accounted for, and then add them into the queue. And then grab your jacket because it's time for the content freeze. So try and have as much of your regular content done before the freeze hits. This allows you to focus on new and updated items you put into the site to avoid having to main the content in two different places. And try and keep your freeze as brief as possible. Do a last minute spot check on any of the problematic batches of content, or do a quick visual scan of the site to verify that everything is in place. And then run a link checker to ensure everything is pointing to where it's supposed to be, keeping an eye out for broken links and non-relative hard-coded links that are pointing to your current site with either the full domain name in place, or to your development or your staging environment. Those will need to be corrected. And now we are ready to launch. So with your post-launch check, you should run a more detailed check to ensure that everything is working in different browsers and devices. Rerun that link checker to make sure that all the content made it over and nothing got left behind. And then submit your forms to make sure that they show up in your CRM and that your confirmation pages work and are loading. Test any other integrations you may have to ensure that they're all correctly pointed. And with the great launch completed, take some time to celebrate and to refocus before you move on to the next steps. So allow for some soak time and then recollect the data to measure against your initial goals that you set up. Check for disruptions in your traffic as an indicator. 404 errors could be missing pages or redirects. Lower conversion rate could mean that your forms are not working in some spots. If you're seeing a high bounce rate or longer page load times, it could mean page errors or other issues. Review the exit pages to make sure that people aren't leaving for an obvious thing that you might have missed. And if your new site is missing the mark, figure out why, make improvements, and then recheck. With everything launched, it's also time to get back into your regular maintenance routine. So you're going to be turning workflow on and admin access off and assigning out roles to your authors. Keep your workflow simple. Start with just a really basic draft, review, and then publish model. And your Sitecore instance can report back with workflow notifications in email or inside of a dedicated Teams channel. And when you're creating and assigning user roles, always assume good intent. Give users the right training and information, and restrict permissions just enough to ensure that mistakes that get made are not catastrophic. If you keep the roles simple, it'll make the rollout quick and it'll make it easier to maintain. And then finally, it's time to do the iterative work on your site. So you're going to start on your phase 2 items and turn your process improvement notes into action items. Take maintenance and other new content creation into account with your build cycles. And schedule regular inventories, audits, and reviews of your content by section to ensure that you're keeping true to your site goals. And with that, I think it's time for questions, if there are any.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. Big round of applause for Jim. I don't know if
You
you
got
could
me
hear,
scared for a
but
second.
sorry, sorry. I was trying to get some applause sounds on the.
All
Cause
good. You were muted.
oh
I
yeah,
was
I
like,
were on
where did he
mute.
go?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, but yeah,
Oh,
thank you
that's
very
okay.
much. It was a great presentation. Let me see if there are some questions from our audience. or else I got a couple.
Sure.
Because I was once in a project that had huge databases. I mean, very very extensive. So you talked about the Sitecore packages strategy like being the most effective for this, but
Mhm.
what other strategy can we use when we are talking about huge amount of data?
So that's really going to come down to what your development team can do, um, as far as with the tools that they have. So my experience is mostly in the authoring and the marketing world. So I've never dealt with large backend databases of data before. Everything that I've migrated has always been in some way, shape, or form manageable. So I know that's not like the greatest answer, but the developers are going to be your best resource on that.
Okay, I see. Yeah, what we have done is, we've used Unicorn. Like
Mhm.
we first have serialized and then upload it to somewhere, then get it back again and deserialize. But it usually takes like a long, long time.
Yeah.
But it's just how it is.
It's meant to be a long process.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully, it's less. Hopefully, not a long and painful process, but a long process.
Hopefully, yeah. And yeah, I love the way that you said like for authors, it's a work in progress, guys. I mean,
It is.
yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you the number of times like that people have come up. They're like, "I think I just broke the site," and it's like, "No, you didn't." It's like they're doing a deployment. That's why it's so slow.
Right,
Or,
right,
you
right.
know, they move this component, and like you entering it in incorrectly or putting it in the wrong spot didn't break anything. Like it's just over here instead. So
Yeah,
just being patient and, like I said, explaining to them like there's nothing you as an author, there's nothing that you as an author is going to do that's going to, cause the entire site to explode. So you're good. So,
exactly. Okay, good. We have a question from our audience from Christopher Westfall. Hi and welcome,
okay.
Christopher. What are some of the tools you mentioned other than Screaming Frog for getting a sitemap?
So the one that I like to use, and I mentioned it in here, there's a tool called Xenu's Link Sleuth, and it's XENU, and it's by, I think his last name is Tillman. It's a really, really old, um, PC application that runs, and then you can set it to scan your site, and it'll pull like some of the most basic data for you. It's like a free version of Screaming Frog, except the only issue is you have to really like it's finicky, and you have to really like finesse in order to get it to work properly. On a positive note, like I've seen instances where Screaming Frog will get caught in a loop, and it'll circle and scan the same pages over and over again. This way, if you're doing that and it happens on Xenu's Link Sleuth, you can shut it down and stop it and still have the data available, but you're not paying for each link that it goes and it checks for you. So I mean that's one. There's another one, that Eric Sander wrote a blog post about it last year called Merlin, that he said he uses for, or he's interested in using. So I haven't used that one yet, but I'm sure I'll come across it somewhere.
All right. Thanks, Jim. I hope, Christopher, your question was answered. Um, you talked about branch templates. So could you go again that little topic, just very
Sure,
briefly?
sure. So sometimes when pages, you have like one particular type of page, but it's got a couple of different variables in the content that gets contained within it. You just boil it down to what the base components are, say a header, a dedicated body section, and a footer. And then you create a branch template that just has those three items in there. Or if it has like it constantly has a CTA that's at the bottom of the page. So you can then hand that off to authors. And then if there's multiple CTAs or other components that need to get slotted in, they can use that template as the basis to build the page out. So they get a head start. So it places some of the most basic stuff in. And then if things need to get complicated, like, you need to put a different set of cards at the bottom, or there's a dynamic loader or some other or a plug-in form or something like that that happens on one particular page, the authors have the ability to just add that piece last and just truck through and get the content out, the initial content out and in place first.
I see. I see. All right. Thanks. We have another question from our audience from Freddy. Hi, welcome,
Okay.
Freddy. He says, "Thanks, Jim. Great session. Uh, thank you. I have a question." He says, "In your experience, which type of migration has been more challenging? Going to what version of Sitecore? Let's say 8.x or 9.x to version 10.x, and why?"
So the for me the Sitecore to Sitecore migrations are, I don't mean any disrespect for saying this, but they're not always as challenging as it is moving from something like Episerver into Sitecore. So things where it's like two completely disparate systems that the developers have to try and figure out how to make talk to each other, and then barring that, it's up to authors to be able to manipulate the content from one system and put it properly into the next system. It just introduces a whole host of complexity when it comes to linking pages. I mean, if you do packages from Sitecore to Sitecore, you can fix it in such a way where it maintains the same GUIDs. So none of those Sitecore to Sitecore internal links are going to break. But you can't really do that from Optimizely going into Sitecore, or from AEM or another, or Drupal even, into Sitecore. It just makes it a little bit more challenging to have to do. So going from something that's non-Sitecore platform into the Sitecore platform is where the real challenge lies. I hope that answers Freddie's question.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's gonna get more complex. Um, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things you said also.
Sure.
To take notes during the migration. That is
Y-
so much important
Yeah.
because sometimes you have to like repeat a certain set of steps from an environment to a different environment.
Yeah.
So it's so very important.
Oh, there's that too. Also, in keeping track of, like, um, I got hung up on putting this component on the page, or when I added this component to the page, I expected it to work this way, and it worked this way instead. So keeping notes on those things, that you can later share with other authors, because they're probably going through the same experience as you are. So sharing those notes around with each other, and during, like, office hours can help. Office hours and, like, group meeting sessions can often help people overcome, like, you know little distractions that come up as they're entering in content. And it also serves, like, after the migration's over, and then you go into that iterative stage of maintenance, and it's like, okay, well, what can we do to kind of better improve the site to make the authoring team a little bit more efficient? And it's, you just take those rough edges off of inserting different components or working with certain templates. Those notes can help go a long way to figuring out what items to stick in the backlog to be able to have the developers go through and make fixes for, or adjustments for.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And just the last thing that I want to highlight, quote unquote, is to remove admin abilities. That sometimes is a thing that we usually forget, and there are
Yeah.
usually users that can do anything. So
Yeah, and that's all. Like, it's good for the migration part, right? Because what you're trying to do is get the content in as quick as possible. It's not necessarily a site that's visible to the rest of the world, so it's okay to make everybody an admin. This way, they're not dealing with workflow, and you're not getting hung up and you're not running into bottlenecks. Like everybody's just free to build the site out the way that it's supposed to go. But like you said, once you get into, you know, post launch, now everybody needs to get assigned a role, because how else is it going to keep track of the different versions that get triggered when you create a new page, or you make an edit on a page, or you make edits to a component? Like if you're going to remove, like, because admins operate outside of workflow, so there's no way to roll things back if somebody makes a mistake or content gets deleted or edited incorrectly and published. So it's always good to give people the freedom during the migration process to move their content. But once that migration process is over, everybody's got to kind of go back to just working the normal way that they're supposed to.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. Okay, let's see if there are some more questions from our audience in the YouTube chat. Remember, guys, you can type your questions for Jim. Let's see if there is another question. I would take advantage of this time to say hello to everybody that has written a bit on the chat. Hello to Augusto, well, Freddy again. Hi, Mario, Christopher. Thanks everyone for joining. We love to have you here. And well, I think there are no more questions. So we will have Jim. We will have every link to your pages where we can follow you. Can we follow you?
Oh, so I'm still on Twitter as NW Content Tech, but you can also find me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name. I'm happy to accept any connections from folks, and I'm on Mastodon as well, which is, I guess, the federated version of Twitter. So, and that's at NW Content Tech. I don't know. It's a long URL. Why do their URLs have to be so long and crazy? Why do the usernames have to be so long and crazy? Who knows? But reach out to me on Slack if you can't find me. I'm in the Sitecore Slack almost all the time. And then you can also, join Sitecore Lunch and we'll hook up in there too.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks for your time and for your great presentation.
Thank you. It was good to be here.
Thanks to you. We'll see you on the other one. And
All right.
of course, thanks to everybody that joined. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí, por unirse siempre. Y nos vemos en la próxima. Muchas gracias.